Hey guys, this is VJ Dinakar. Today I want to talk about what is meant by disturbing the peace in the context of a domestic violence restraining order. So I've made a few videos about domestic violence restraining orders. That's something I handle all the time, both in getting a domestic violence restraining order and defending against a domestic violence restraining order. But specifically, the law says that you can get a restraining order for striking, molesting, battering, sexually assaulting, or destroying the personal property of somebody else, or for disturbing the peace of the other party. And that's kind of like the catch-all phrase that the law allows you to get a domestic violence restraining order for. And I want to go through exactly what that means, both in terms of the law, which was actually changed as of January 2022 to make the law in terms of disturbing the peace even more expansive and vague, and in terms of the case law that has come before that has defined what is meant by disturbing the peace. So just reading from the actual statute that defines what disturbing the peace is, you'll find that in Family Code section 6320C, it says that disturbing the peace of the other party refers to conduct that, based on the totality of the circumstances, destroys the mental or emotional calm of the other party. And that phrase, destroys the mental or emotional calm of the other party, actually comes from California appellate case law. And the legislature simply adopted that phrase, destroys the mental or emotional calm of the other party, from that case law in January 2022. The legislature went on to further define disturbing the peace to include coercive control. And they gave some examples of what coercive control would mean, but basically they're saying that coercive control, by definition of this statute, which was enacted only in January 2022, means to disturb the peace of another party. And they define what they meant by coercive control. Now, just so you understand, so far as of January 2022, I'm not aware of any case law that has actually specifically dealt with any cases that define explicitly what coercive control means in terms of examples. But the legislature laid out in 6322 what they meant by coercive control. And they say it means isolating the other party from friends, relatives, or other sources of support, or depriving the party of basic necessities. So just to review the first two definitions of coercive control, isolating from friends and family and depriving someone of basic necessities. So basically that means that if you isolate someone, you have disturbed their peace by engaging in coercive control, and that can be a basis for a domestic violence restraining order. And if someone deprives you of basic necessities, again, that can be a basis to get a domestic violence restraining order, because that's an instance of coercive control, which is disturbing someone's peace. The third definition of coercive control is controlling, regulating, or monitoring the other party's movements, communications, daily behavior, finances, economic resources, or access to services. Again, this is very expansive, very broad. Basically, it means if someone's a controlling person, whether they control finances, whether they control your movements, whether they control your communications, they certainly do not have to hit you, threaten to hit you, destroy your personal property. But by doing these controlling behaviors, they, by definition of this new law enacted in January 22, have disturbed your peace. The fourth definition of coercive control is compelling the other party by force, threat of force, or intimidation, including threats based on actual or suspected immigration status, to engage in conduct in which the other has a right to engage. So again, this does not involve actual physical violence. This could simply involve a threat of your immigration status, saying that if you don't do this, if you don't clean up the house, I'm going to get you deported. If you don't agree to my rules in the house, I'm going to get you deported. If there's even a hint about your immigration status in a conversation in a threatening way, according to this, that's an instance of coercive control, and that is a basis for getting a domestic violence restraining order. The fifth definition of coercive control is engaging in reproductive coercion, which consists of control over the reproductive autonomy of another through force, threat of force, or intimidation, and may include, but is not limited to, unreasonably pressuring the other party to become pregnant, deliberately interfering with contraception use or access to reproductive health information, or using coercive tactics to control or attempt to control pregnancy outcomes. So that is certainly a mouthful, but I do believe what it means, or would mean in practice, because there is no case law published on this specific form of coercive control, would be that a male interferes with a female's use of birth control or tampers with her birth control, for perhaps by taking one of the birth control pills and substituting it for another pill in order that she would get pregnant, or preventing her from using birth control so she will not get pregnant, or even a conversation about that, suggesting that I want you to become pregnant, pressuring her to become pregnant, or saying you should not become pregnant, or suggesting an abortion. Similarly, I guess if the law is gender neutral, and it certainly is on its face, it could also involve a female tampering with a condom such that that person become pregnant against the wishes of the male. So that is the definition of coercive control, which is simply one species of what constitutes disturbing someone's peace, which you can get a restraining order for. I want to go through now some published case law in which the appellate court gives examples of instances of someone's peace being disturbed. In several cases, the court has said that what disturbs the peace of another person differs in each case, so that they are not trying to take a extremely limited and specific analysis of what that is, but that they do look at this on a totality of the circumstances basis and on a case-to-case basis. But an example in a case law where the court did find disturbing the peace was where the husband was communicating with the wife about issues in excess of those necessary to custody exchanges, stalking the wife, verbally attacking the wife, and threatening her regarding visitation. So basically, commonly in disputed family law custody cases, there is a visitation order, and in this case, the court found that the communication that was allowed only for the purposes to facilitate visitation was one of the bases to find that the wife's peace was disturbed. Another case, physical abuse of the couple's children in itself destroyed the partner's calm and made her fear for her own safety and that of her children, although she was not physically abused herself. So that specific case, and I'll put the citation on the video, specifically makes the finding that if your child is abused by the other party, that in and of itself almost always is going to be an independent basis to get you a restraining order, because that necessarily is going to be disturbing your peace. Another case found that an instance of disturbing someone's peace involved contacting a party by phone, email, and text, showing up at that person's house unannounced, and refusing to leave. So again, it seems on its face that this is kind of de minimis or minor conduct. So contacting someone by phone, email, or text, showing up unannounced, then refusing to leave, that doesn't even go to specific verbal abuse. simply contacting with unwanted phone, email, or text, showing up at the house and refusing to leave, that is going to be enough to show that your peace is destroyed. And again, to define what your disturbing someone's peace means, generally it's destroying someone's emotional or mental calm. So in another case, a husband publicly disclosed the content of his wife's confidential email communications, causing her to suffer shock and embarrassment and to fear the destruction of her business relationships. That was sufficient to constitute disturbing her peace, the appellate court found in this case. In another case, the appellate court found that a single Facebook post was not sufficient to make a finding of disturbing the other party's peace. Now, in that case, it would depend on the actual content. I think there could be a single Facebook post, but the court's ruling basically is that a single post generally is not going to be sufficient. In another case, depriving a party with access to his or her child may be sufficient to be a instance of disturbing someone's peace sufficient to get a restraining order. So if there's a custody order in place and there is repeated and consistent inability or blocking of access to custody by one of the parents, that itself on its own can be the foundation for a domestic violence restraining order because that disturbs your peace. In another case, the court found that having an affair with another man, developing a yeast infection, and then filing her own, the wife's own, well-supported DVRO were not a sufficient basis for the man to get a restraining order against the woman. There's a few other cases which have defined the contours or given examples of what constitutes disturbing someone's peace for the purposes of a domestic violence restraining order, but I've gone through a lot of them, and those are some examples. And I think as we move forward and we see more cases coming up through the appellate courts that define the additions to the statute that were just made in January 22, specifically regarding coercive control, we're going to have a lot more published opinions. And I think this definition of what you can get a restraining order for in the context of domestic violence restraining order is going to continue to expand. Guys, if you have any questions about fighting against a restraining order or trying to get your own restraining order or what it means to disturb someone's peace for the purposes of a domestic violence restraining order, definitely reach out to me. Visit me at my website at vjlaw.com. Take care and all the best.